All right, let's see. Britain is cooked. Asmongold's perspective on what we would see as. Move myself up. His perspective on what is good and bad about what looks like the conversation topic is between a woman can have genitalia, insert a bigoted phrase of something men don't really understand. So this is going to be interesting. Trigger warning. A lot of bigotry and misogyny is going to be discussed.
It's going to take them a long time on the National Health Service to get rid of it, but that's another separate problem.
All right.
Can a woman
I think we'll
have
leave
a
it on a
penis?
woman can have a penis. People can
I think you're lacking nuance and complexity about a pretty
Not
complicated
really. You couldn't have been
conversation.
clearer.
I'm clear, because actually when you want to look at the science...
You were crystal clear.
The
That's
science-
a simple question.
But you're laughing at it, which I think
I
demeans
think it's
trans people.
absolutely
What have you
ridiculous.
got?
Being trans doesn't make you a woman. It makes you a trans woman. A biological woman and a trans woman are different. Like, I don't know why this is so hard for people to understand. Duh. Of course.
Against trans people, why are you punching down? Why are you not saying
Nothing against
the real
trans
problem?
people.
Look at this. See, it's the reframing. Why are you punching down? Well, because they're wrong. They're wrong. It's annoying.
The fact that they think a biological woman and a transsexual is different is just the beginning of what I would call a very narrow perspective, because oftentimes the characteristics of womanhood is oftentimes discussed with men without them realizing when you say you're acting like a woman, or you're acting a lot feminine, like, or you're acting less like a man. And when they say less like a man, the only thing they compare it to is a woman. So characteristics, qualities of a human, personality, sentience, what the brain perceives as a reality. This is more important than what they're about to discuss, but we're going to see a lot of uneducated men who didn't study biology or didn't study human behavioral sciences pretty much go all in and think they're geniuses.
And I don't want to deal with it. I don't think anybody does. It's fucking annoying.
I've already told you that I think trans
You
people...
sound like you have a huge problem with trans people.
No.
What a little bitch. Oh my God. He's got a huge problem with trans people because he doesn't think women can have dicks. Is that right?
It sounds to me like you don't understand what a woman is, which I think is a huge problem for someone leading a party in this country.
A woman is a gender.
Sorry?
You said what's a woman?
No,
a woman is a
a
gender.
biological
and gender
female.
is complicated.
No.
Gender is a spectrum.
It's not complicated. A woman is a
Is
biological
gender a spectrum? Is it that binary?
Do you think people...
It is binary. It's completely binary. The invented sociology from fake Karen consensuses that have fake credentials for agreeing with the other fake credentials. It actually has no weight, no value, no influence, and it's completely made up. There are only two genders. There is no third gender. Anybody that's intersex or something like that, this is a medical abnormality. If you ask somebody how many arms does a human being have, every single person would say 2 arms. But just because some people are born with 1 arm doesn't mean that the answer isn't 2.
This is just eugenics. So you can say a person is black or white, but both of them are genetically different, and you can say that to prove one could be superior or lesser because one can stay out in the sun more and one cannot. When you talk like a man, you're like, hey, what's up? But when you talk like a woman, you're like, hey. It's like, you know what I mean? They say it's a complete different perspective on what life is, because you will realize that when they discuss womanhood, they're discussing a character, a person. When you're discussing biology, you're discussing something that is always going to be different because each ancestor came from a different background genetically and came from a different understanding of reality through the impressions of their environment that molded their very being. When you create a mental psyche, when you're aware of being aware, you're sentient, then you're going to understand the differences between someone who understands what it means to act like a man through culture, through discussion of it, and what it means to act like a woman when it comes to culture perspective, because both are human beings with their own perspectives of reality and life. It is something that biologically we can identify as different, sure, but it is not something that we have to say is definitive, because everything would technically be a difference, which is why it leads to eugenics, because then you can define who won more historically through genetics of killing, destroying, conquering, and you can start to define people as superior or inferior, and then you can say, no, there's a difference between a man and then an inferior subhuman, which then of course would relate to what they would perceive as genetically inferior. this falls back to a lot of the old school thinking of I have big arm and I kill, whereas the other person has small arm, they get conquered. It is not intelligent, it is very naive. There is a big difference between the people who can see only the gender through scientific measures, because scientific measures tell you there's infinite genders, because again, we can mutate our genes however we want by living in an environment of being more snowy, then change our skin color. We can live in an environment that is more cruel and brutal and by the sun, and therefore we are seen as more brutal or aggressive people. But then it's just again melanin combined with the fact that we're constantly being enslaved, or there are people killing in war. And then you'll develop a more aggressive mentality or aggressive perspective, and that could be seen as more manly or less manly in accordance to if you're in a peaceful environment, people would think you're more of a woman, and the characteristics of a woman start to develop on a spectrum because it's a perspective. And also when you have science and you have surgeries and the surgery gets perfected, one day you will be able to completely change your gender to where even his discussion now biologically, man and woman can be not cannot be seen as different than one another, because you can switch it to 100%. Which is why people are getting upset. You're seeing the beginning of what could be men changing into a complete woman, 100% DNA wise, authentic body anatomy to a woman, and therefore you would have to be forced to acknowledge scientifically there is no difference between man and women, because it's now just a sentient impression of your environment and then your characteristics of your interpretation of what that means.
So whenever you're looking at intersex people or other degrees of medical deformities, this is not included inside of normal everyday speaking. You ask somebody how many fingers does a person have, they say 10 fingers. Many people are born with 9 fingers, but nobody would hesitate to answer the question, how many fingers does a person have? Everybody would say 10, because we logically and rationally know that medical deformities and abnormalities are not included in the generalities that we talk about that are 99.9% of the outcomes, right? So that's number one. Number two, no, there is no gray.
He just openly discriminate against disabled people and people who are just born different than him, because if you're in an all-white society, they could call you a deformality for having brown skin. This is again why it's just eugenics, because they'll say what the normal general norm is just being white, until they see someone who's not white, and then they'll say they are completely different than you and they'll never understand you. He again confesses that he does not like minorities, he does not like the disabled, he does not like people who are born mutated in his eyes, instead of seeing it as something that you accept people as, or even something that one day you can bring them equal, because if someone was born without an arm, they might want an arm, and there might be someone out there who's completely fine with it, and that's perspective. Because again, you're gonna have to start to understand that in the future, which is now, you're gonna have to see the world through a perspective of everyone can be made equal. And that's why I always said, in a world of Darwinism where the strongest will survive, if you live in a society that can make anyone strong and anyone can survive and be strong, what does Darwinism really mean? It's humanity, because the strongest survives purely off humanity. And because of that, the most humane will lead, and the most humane say you can be whatever you want, because that's the strongest perspective you can have. It's American freedom and liberation from what we used to have as a completely controlled society of a theocracy of having only Christian Protestants in control, which led to the establishment of the United States of America. Now, as it evolved past the original standing point, a lot of people have more freedoms and they're allowed to be who they want to be, thus having a new group of people that will reveal themselves as confident of who they are and wanting to be accepted for who they are, whereas before you would force them into being what you want them to be, and you would kill them into submission, enslave them into submission, or outcast them to make them learn their lessons to be like everyone else, which of course in this situation could be more like a white man. It is just a discussion of eugenics.
Area between this. You're either a man or a woman. That's it. There's literally no spectrum at all. This is invented. This is it. The entire philosophy for this is completely invented. It's made up. And also, here's a very important component to it. It is invented with no actual scientific basis on hard science. There's no actual hard science for this. This is all sociology. And what sociology is basically taken over by a bunch of Karens that want to sit around and agree with each other, and they want to invent things that aren't real. Just because a bunch of psychologists got together and decided something, that doesn't make it real. It doesn't. This is all soft science, also known as bullshit.
People are born male and female.
Not necessarily.
Oh, for God's sake.
I think it's more complicated than
It's
that.
not more complicated, Zach.
It's not more complicated than that if you're a TV show host who wants to make it binary and ridiculous.
Zach, you're going to have
but
to
actually,
work
if you
this
want to
stuff
have
out,
a
mate,
nuanced
let me tell you.
conversation that actually reflects science,
You know, when I asked you if you want to be prime, when I asked you if you want to be prime,
See, this is what they do, is they try to make an appeal to science while at the same time denying it. So actually, science is very clear about this. And do they want to talk about the science of IQ distribution of different races in different countries? Absolutely not. Never let these people use your values against you. These people are the most anti-scientific, anti-fact-based people that you can possibly ever imagine. They hate science, they hate facts, they hate rationality, and they want to replace it with their argumentation that is none of those, but they want to replace it with that and then make it to where you can't criticize it. That's what they're doing. I hate this guy. I hate him.
Minister. There is not a cat in hell's chance of you ever becoming Prime Minister if you don't know what a woman is.
Well, you'll see us going up in the polls. We're the most favourable party in London right now, so let's see about
Why don't you
that.
start going out tomorrow with your big campaign that women can have penises?
And this also, by the way, should be the man campaigning focus against any of these people. Because what I view the I don't know what a woman is or I don't know how many genders there are, they are a frame of reference indicator. I've said this before, I'll go through it again. Would you trust the judgment of a person who thought that the earth was flat to make decisions for you? I would not. Why not? Well, I mean, it's just one little thing. It has no bearing on everything else. The reason why is because it indicates a lapse in judgment and a breakdown in logical argumentation and decision-making that is so extreme, so problematic, and so ridiculous that this person can't be trusted to make a decision for anything else. You can't trust a person that thinks that the earth is flat to make a logically sound decision for other things. I view the gender stuff as the exact same. If you think this, you can't be trusted to make decisions for other topics because your mental facilities, your logical reasoning is compromised to such a fundamental degree that you actually just can't be trusted. Now, you might get things right occasionally, but this is an accident rather than a system. It's a belief that means nothing, or sorry, it means nothing, but it also means everything. Does that make sense? Like, there's no real consequence of this belief, but if you believe it, it means everything because it's so ridiculous it should never be seen. That's the main issue.
Again, men and women for generations, scientifically, you can become a man or a woman, as proven as our whole biological evolution as itself. Coming out as a man or a woman is technically a genetic discussion. Scientifically, the day will come when you can make 100% woman through genetic coding, and that's the same as finding out how to conquer cancer or any other disease or any sickness, or what we would call changing your skin color because you can now click a button like a character customization screen. Eventually, you're going to have to come to the terms that you can choose your gender. And it's, of course, proven by the fact that sometimes you guys abort children before they're the gender you want. That technically is saying that you pick your gender. What comes after is the sentient impression of your brain, which creates the personality. So again, technically there are men and women who can identify as either or, and they can identify as characteristics and a gender of characteristics because it's a social acceptance of that. There's a lot of people out there that say, for example, in same-sex relationships, there's someone who is more woman-like than the other, and that's like called the bottom versus the top. A reference to who's more on top and who's beneath them in terms of domination, or who is the strong one. But oftentimes they choose two strong people sometimes, and that's okay, that's perfectly fine. But the characteristics would oftentimes be who is the woman in the relationship, who's the man in the relationship when you're dealing with the same sex. You are already picking your gender in accordance to your sentient impression of the environment, and you're discussing socially what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, when science will advance and you will no longer ask what is a woman, what is a man, and you will have to ask what is a human being. And this is, of course, the discussion and the understanding of what it means to be a better person, a better perspective of what it means to respect the human's decision, and soon what it means scientifically to understand that there is no difference between the two except for the social acceptance of either or. And so, of course, this discussion is going to come out continuously that human beings deserve respect and dignity and love. And even though you see them as a minority, saying you're lucky to be acknowledged is the same discussion you have with black and brown people saying they're lucky to have the right to vote, they're lucky to be seen as human because the mutation of their skin color or the mutation of what they think is manly because you don't act civil because the word civil is now a hint to white men or a hint to straight white men. So of course, eventually you're going to start to realize what it means to be a human being. So what is a human would be my question to you.
And that's the reason why I think they need to hammer them on this issue. Absolutely make this the #1 issue. Because this is something, and the reason why is because this issue is accessible to every single person. Everybody knows what gender is. Everybody knows what a man is. Everybody knows what a woman is. If you can't get over this, you have no business discussing economics. I'm sorry, you have no business discussing economics if you don't understand how many genders there are. That's it. That's your scientific ableism? Well, what do you mean by that? And what about females born with male genitals? Do they come under trans? No, they're just medical abnormalities, and they shouldn't be used in discussing topics like this.
He just confessed right there. Only people who are seen as white male or what he considers normal should be discussed, and minorities shouldn't have a voice. He is just openly advocating for a white supremacist society because when you start to talk about abnormal people, his perspective of abnormal means you're disabled, you don't have a voice, you have different skin color, you're different than the normal because it's a social issue, and that everything is a mathematical perspective, but his mathematics is completely off. It's completely wrong. So he's bad at math because it just does not equate to actual science.
Obviously. Why would you discuss a topic whenever this is a medical abnormality? Why would you do that? That doesn't make sense.
I'm going to be going out tomorrow with my big campaign about inequality in this country between the multimillionaires and billionaires and working class communities who are really suffering.
When people see you say to me, women have a penis,
well, because you're trying to distract from inequality, and actually, I think most people.
This is what they do: is they use this. Oh, we're fighting for the poor people. They use it as a Trojan horse so they can push their sick identity politics on children. They say that, oh, well, we care about, education and we care about making sure about childcare. Well, if you really cared about kids, you wouldn't want them having to change in the gender of in the opposite gender, right? You wouldn't want men in the women's locker room. So they don't actually care about kids.
Asking you
don't care about the conversation.
If you want to be prime minister,
they just care about the fact they want to put food on the table.
You are a fast emerging
trans people.
You are a fast.
And I do think that this is the problem: is that people like him have totally outflanked the, I think, right-wing people, because right-wing people are unwilling to compromise with the fantasy that everybody can earn their own way. I think that if you had a right-wing person who didn't have any of the cultural retard opinions like this guy or Zoran Mandami, but he had the same socialist policies, I think that person would win a double-digit amount of people in a national vote. I do. I think that that's all it takes, because this is the issue. Basically, you can either have good social policies and a bunch of foreigners, or you can have no foreigners and shitty social policies. That's the problem. And so, and I think that people want something that's in between that.
Emerging politician in this country, I'm perfectly entitled to ask you.
That happened in Germany one time? Well, it happens everywhere. And I know that people like to reframe it like it's Nazis or something like that. But the reality is that, are we Nazis because we have Social Security? Of course not. Are we Nazis because we have food stamps? Of course not. But these are national social programs that you could...
He just preferred National Socialism. So this guy just confessed to being Nazi. Nationalism is pride in your country in accordance to its origins, which of course is nationalistic pride in colonial empires. Considering a majority of countries are nationally one race, America is one of the abnormalities. If you look into the backgrounds of a lot of other cultures, they're very slightly different in accordance to religious beliefs and accordance to what their racial preferences are, because our understanding of race in America is so black and white that if you see it, a Middle Eastern person who is in a society of like a bunch of different Middle Eastern perspectives, they won't see them as different races, even though within that society, they see them as something they have to control or push down because they think different than them. He does not understand the perspective of what it means to be ethnically diverse or a society of immigrants, because again, he thinks nationalism just means caring for your country. Very perverted perspective of what that is, because it's again, nationalism in accordance to what we see in European societies means whites only, and then socialism just means helping people in your society. He just turned that completely around because he again believes in an extreme ethno domination of what that society was built on historically, rather than what it is turning into, which is a continuation of building on it. And then you're gonna see a lot of white supremacist talking points come from him. I don't think it's ignorant on the perspective of he has no idea what he's doing, but I believe it's ignorant that he thinks he's smart and doesn't have to listen to other people, because again, his perspective is that he's white, the majority, and therefore you must submit to his ideas. This is why it's a very, very bigoted understanding of reality. And he is trying to push, again, you just heard him say nationalist socialism is EBT. That's not National Socialism. National Socialism means EBT for whites only. EBT for the typical normal, which is the majority ruling class, which of course is going to be a white majority class. So he perverted socialism into being nationalism, and nationalism completely being ignored as something that is the majority rule, which the majority rule has historically been the oppressor, because again, once you have too much power and you can tell people what you want them to be by forcing their environment to change who they are, you are oppressing the people and controlling them into what you want them to be, which will be whitewashing black and brown people, which would be telling a gay person to be straight, which would be telling a person there's only two genders. It is not progressive. It is not evolutionary based. It is not scientifically based. It is based on the perspective that if science allows you to force someone to be what you want, then that's fair. That's Darwinism through brutality, not Darwinism through equality, which is the strength that everyone can be equal and strong, rather than the perspective he has. He's trying to sell equality means you should accept that the people who gave you permission of equality should be listened to, because it's an oppressor's mindset, oppressor's perspective, and someone who hates the people who are different than them. That's nationalism. Then you had socialism, which is what we would usually call humanity, because everyone deserves rights as a human being. And that's where a lot of the food comes in, housing, and basic rights and needs of education and jobs and prospects to equal pay come from, because you're going to start to see the world from a perspective of true equality.
You know, if you intentionally misunderstand the words, you could reframe them as being National Socialist policies definitionally. So it's another intentional misunderstanding.
You're absolutely entitled, and people are entitled to see the ludicrousness of these questions, rather than tackling the inequality and the fact we're not funding our national health service, the fact we've got schools crumbling, the fact that people are struggling to put food on the table. That's what people are worried about, not trans people.
Okay.
Well, if they're not worried about that and you're losing elections over it, then why don't you just stop using this issue? But they won't. And that's the thing, is that if this issue, and this is what they do, is they try to always make an appeal to triviality.
They're not making an appeal to triviality. What they're doing is they're saying the perspective of the most oppressed people oftentimes relate on the same conditions of how they are oppressing you. A black or brown person is going to be pushed down in accordance to the same measures a woman or a gay person or transsexual is, which is why minorities unite in their causes, because the same person who's oppressed for being a brown person is going to be oppressed in the same measures and ways as a gay person will be, or a transsexual or a woman, because it just continues onward toward looking down on people, and therefore the same way you're looked down on by someone's nose to look at you as lesser, they're not going to realize that they are doing the same thing across the board, which will create a huge group of people who unite to fight against the bigotry and unite against the hatred of which is against all people who are seen as different than the majority. This is why, again, people of color and people of sexuality freedom, or the freedom of sexuality, oftentimes unite because they both get the same chains put on their wrist and their neck, metaphorically and literally sometimes, because they'll be put into camps, whether to be re-educated, conversion therapies, or even just be executed for being something they see as different, which happened to black and brown people, happens to gay people, happens to transsexuals, and then continuation of the unity of the oppressed people to fight back against the oppressor allows for a progressive value of acceptance, which allows for new perspectives, which allows for new innovation, which allows for new humane principles, and those humane principles are what we live as the foundation of our society to build us up as a humane civil society.
They try to say that, well, this is a very small issue. It doesn't matter that much. Okay, well, if it's so small and it doesn't matter that much, then why don't you just relinquish it and then just let other people take the reins and let them decide? Because obviously they care about it a lot, but you don't want to do that because you're actually just holding these economic policies hostage so you can put men in women's bathrooms. Excuse me. That's the reason why. To focus on the important issues like Bernie? Well, yeah, exactly. And he never talks about those issues. But you can't win an argument against someone that's not sane or stable. Yeah, exactly. He'll say the right is fueling the culture war whenever it's actually the left that complains about lack of non-white representation. People like this, the reason why they care about the culture war is because they want to assume that they've already won it. I don't think that we are harsh enough towards these people. I don't think so. I think that the level of extremity and the level of consequence these people need to deal with has to be substantially higher than what it's at now. And I think that, as I said before, I will always vote for people that do that. Whenever we have somebody that is willing to take people like this and literally just send them to Afghanistan, that's who I'll vote for. That's going to be my guy. Sorry. That's what's going to happen. And anybody who tries to talk to a kid about being trans, or somebody that did an operation on a kid, or gave a kid hormones for being trans and the kid was 13, now you're going to jail for 20 years for something that you did back then, and now you're being retroactively punished for it. That's right. That's right.
So he just admitted that what he does in order to enact his will is to oppress people, jail them, and deport them, which is proof again that he believes in oppressing the people that he thinks different than him, because he again used children as a shield, because his talking points have no ground or basis until he uses the victimization of children in order to shield his accusations against people he sees as lesser. And of course, this can appeal to every single talking point when you use children as a shield. What if you teach my kids to be black or brown? What if you teach my kids to be gay? What if you teach my kids to be extremely oppressive and evil? You can deport anyone you want if you use brutality, which is why there's Darwinism through brutalism and then Darwinism through humanity, which humanity would be the most humane principle, which is of course our biological need to help each other, because if you're not biologically understanding of helping people, you're an inhumane person, which is the opposite of humanity, which means you want to apply an animalistic perspective, the same as an animal in the forest where it kills a disabled animal, or it kills one of its own because it doesn't reproduce, or it's just angry at it. Therefore, the animalistic perspective of the inhumane will be governed by brutality and not through acceptance or progressive value. So now someone has the right to kill you for dating a porn star. Someone has the right to kill you because you dated a woman who was not virgin when you met them. Someone has the right to kill you for being an interrace because you're not living in accordance to what is normally a social acceptable perspective. And because of that, you're ruling through brutality. That brutality will come around and start to control you back, right? So someone like Asmongold could be seen as a creep or a weirdo because in a normal society of white men, you're supposed to have a wife and kids by his age, and now he is seen as a pariah or outcasted or even deported because now you're supposed to have that normal standard of life, and if you can't have one, you have to go purchase one or purchase a slave or purchase your lifestyle because now you're seen as an outcast or lesser, to which now you have to start voting for your rights of being seen as a human because you have the right to be essentially a lonely, sad guy who plays video games all day and is bigoted. Because even in your brutal society, they'll start to push competitiveness through the perspective of the principles of being more civil through brutality, which means they now have the right to push him down. Because when you start to accept pushing people down to make yourself the higher up, they run out of people of color, they run out of gay people, they run out of women that are always fighting back, and now you have a society of men fighting men, and a society of men fighting men would again kick him out through Darwinism, through brutality and the inhumane conditions, and then the humane conditions that he's currently privileged under to talk this way is only afforded to him by the progressive values that he has yet to see. Because if he goes to a Christian conservative backing of ideology, he'll find that the brutal mercy they give is to watch your mouth and be more cordial, or else you're gonna be pushed down, which is a completely different perspective than he has, which is he now becomes the minority that has to fight back in the same exact measure that all the people he pushed out through oppressing them, he will have to face through the same measure as he fights against that same oppression they fought through. And then he will be the reemergence of what it means to be a progressive, because eventually he's going to need backup. That backup will be women, that backup will be gay people, that backup will be minorities, and then he uses his logical understanding of reality of science in order to take power, in order to be seen as a normal human again, where he'll sit in his privilege and then continuously talk, whether bigoted or not, because it's a privilege to be a bigot, ignorant person in a society that allows you to do so, because that is seen as progressive in a society where you had to eat proper, talk proper, dress proper, and now you are now having to adhere to that normal that you are the minority of again. Which is why I often say in societies of pure white men, they turn on each other eventually and start to control each other, which leads to rebellion, which leads to the Civil War, which leads to the independence and Declaration of Independence of human rights, that all men and women are equal under the Constitution.
That's what you got to do. And that's the nice way. It could be even worse than that, but I'm a nice guy.
See, they're worried about women's rights.
I'm worried about women's rights too, but as I said, I offered several times to talk about the police force. I offered several times to talk about the inequality pay gap.
You want to talk about other things, I get that.
I want to talk about women's rights. Let's have a conversation about women's rights, but let's not talk about trans women specifically.
You think women have penises?
You had said to me, can a woman have a penis?
Yeah.
And I said, yes. So if they're transitioning, for instance, then of course a woman can have a penis.
It's complete.
Well, no, because if you're transitioning, it doesn't make you a woman. I mean, that's the reason why.
When were you a doctor or an expert in women's rights or science?
You need to be an expert.
The Supreme Court has made it crystal clear.
But that's not the Supreme Court's
be an
job.
expert.
The Supreme Court's job is to look at legislation
down the law
and
of
then
a
make a
land.
legal ruling.
Okay. So you know more than the Supreme Court.
Well, yes, actually, in this case, yes, I do.
Of course, right. There it is. And like he is, yeah, exactly. And if you're a woman, why would you transition? Well, I don't know. I mean, like some women feel like they're men. They can do whatever they want. But it's obviously not the same. And look at this. Here's another one.
Twain shall meet, unfortunately, on this one. We do have to bring you our vote because you have been voting in the text and online vote today. So here is the result. Is multiculturalism working? Here is what you told us. 5% of those of you who voted said yes, it is. 95% of those of you who voted this morning said no, it isn't.
Oh, man.
On this one,
fucking base.
We do have to bring you our vote because you have been voting in the text and online vote today.
Man, how about that? No comment, nothing to say. There it is. Wow. And it's got to be worse than that, too.
This is Ari, Gwendolyn, and Brinifer. They are in a polyamorous relationship, and they all parent Hazel and Sparrow.
We have a 2-year-old anti-gender baby and a 10-year-old who is non-binary.
They have chosen not to disclose Sparrow's gender.
We don't know it yet. It's something that Sparrow's going to have to figure out and then tell us.
But their parenting approach is controversial.
Talk about spawning in hard mode. Can you imagine this? Like, if this kid just turns out to be normal, not super successful, just normal, this is going to be like a success story that nobody's ever heard of before.
His perspective on what it is to be normal is the same perspective on what it means to be a progressive born in a conservative family. You are taught to be conservative, you're taught to be Christian, you're taught to be adhering to your cultural norms. These people growing up in a more progressive background will be able to choose their gender, choose their sexuality, choose who they are as a human being, which is why they even said they will have to tell them about it, because the same way a conservative family will accept a gay child or a child that is not acting as what they would deem as normal, they would still love their child. And therefore, this perspective, again, is going to be coming from the perspective of what they see as someone who escapes a conservative family is not seen as someone who is escaping extreme, harsh conditions, though the person who's lived in that will consider that. If you escape that condition and you build your own life and you build your own perspective, you have the right to live and choose as you wish what your human rights are, because you're a human being worthy of dictating your future, and that means you're worthy of love and respect. So again, this is going in accordance to what he believes is normal, what he believes is okay, what he believes is socially acceptable, not what actually is in accordance to what is a human, which is a human being is worthy of picking their own path in life. They don't have to adhere to this other perspective that is going to be forcing them to be what they want them to be, but rather picking out what they are and who they want to be like. You can have a white guy who looks up to a black man, and then you can see that perspective seen as, I can't believe my son looks up to black people. You can change that perspective into someone who says they are a homosexual, but the homosexuality is not accepted, but I can't believe this guy picked homosexuality, or this woman, and now you're going to have to see it as someone that you see as different when really they grew up in your household and they still grew up in accordance to what they believed as their personal belief, and they're still in a society that allows you to pick that, because again, it's your choice, your body. So when you realize that It's sentience, the brain that's in your head that allows you to see the world in your perspective. It's something that a lot of people don't understand because culturally we're still fighting against a lot of the bigoted perspectives, since a lot of people see brutal Darwinism as the true path, since it got them nuclear weapons, military, the concept of what it means to respect a woman or a man, because it's still in lost in translation due to a lot of people questioning what a woman is. It should be what is a human being, which a human being has the right to do what they want with their own body. It's just how it has always been. Tattooing has been seen as mutilation of your body. Now there's doctors with tattoos. Now there's pharmacists with tattoos. We used to see that as thuggery or gang-related ideology, or even mutilation. So it evolves continuously on what you believe is okay and not okay.
This is gonna be crazy.
I have.
It's like a normal
literally
person
received
becoming a
death threats.
billionaire.
Crazy, crazy lady. I hope karma hits you back and your kids grow up to detest you.
Uh-huh. My extraordinary family.
These polyamorous parents let their children choose their gender.
Man.
For their oldest child, Hazel, that's neither male nor female.
Please tell us how and why you decided to come out as non-binary.
Because the pronouns she and he did not fit. Non-binary was what I turned to. Though I do choose to act and look more feminine.
Yeah.
Can I go down now? Of course.
This poor kid.
2.5-year-old Sparrow has yet
2.5 years old, and you're already getting farmed by the gender freaks. 2.5, dude. Wow.
to make a choice about their gender.
Sparrow, do you want a banana? They're anti-gender, but we're using they them
Anti-gender. Oh, wow.
pronouns. Sure, they have anatomy, we understand it, but like that's not indicative of their identity.
This poor kid.
It's something that Sparrow's gonna have to figure out and then tell us before we can tell anyone else.
Particularly because it's, you know, something that our parents did and they got it wrong.
Man, there it is. Our parents didn't treat us the right way, so now we're indoctrinating and grooming these children into thinking the right thing. Oh my fucking God. Isn't this sick? This is absolutely, the three should just be in jail. I know. And that's what should happen, but we'll see if it ever does. I don't know if it will or not. Oh, here we go. Send them to Iran? God.
I resisted for a long time this notion that Democrats were deliberately inviting masses of foreigners into the country because they wanted to grow little Democrats and create a one-party state. I've started to come around to that view. Before Trump effectively closed the southern border, I imagined a lot of it was incompetence and fecklessness. Now, there may be an element of that.
They're waking up.
But
The boomers
I think it was
are
more
waking
intentional.
up.
The Biden administration opened that border on purpose.
They did.
And shipped people all
For
over the country,
demographic
wherever they
replacement.
wanted to go.
Absolutely.
They put illegal migrants with no ID onto commercial airplanes.
That's right.
With regular passengers.
That's
who
right.
all have to have, you know, an impeccable national ID.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just, there is design behind it. And I don't have any other theory aside from this pathological passion for minorities and a weird notion that people who are non-white are superior.
That's right. Yep.
I don't see any other reason for inviting so many people in, especially because, you know, on the one hand, the left talks about, oh, we need these people economically. You know,
we don't.
have this aging age structure and, you know, Social Security's imperiled. And
Social Security's imperiled. Let's bring in more people that will drain it.
And Medicare costs too much. And we need young people to fill out the workforce. But then, you know, they support family reunification, which means these people can bring in their parents.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so much for improving the age structure.
Yep. That's right. That's right. Now you see it. Now you see it. There it is. It's so fucking obvious. There it is. He's in peril.
I want to go back to the talking point before I end this video on what they believe we need economically. He said, no, we don't. The proof that you need people of color economically is proven that America exploits a lot of the countries outside of its borders. Right? So let's say you pushed everyone out. You still have to enslave people and kill them to take the land. All right? Let's say we're past that now, right? We're here. You kicked everyone out again. You still need to exploit those countries that those people of color come from in their cheap labor and their resources, because again, you would have to sacrifice your people in warfare continuously, total warfare, in order to conquer the entire planet and force your perspective on them. And if you push them out continuously and kill them, essentially what you're saying is that you believe that human beings are only your race. Human beings are only your perspective, because you still need to exploit those worlds in order to get their resources, their hard work, their labor. And as proven through history, America stole a lot of the economic policies of Chile in order to enact their economic policies here in America, which is an ethnically different person, which of course means the success of this nation economically, resource-wise, and labor still comes from the perspective of people exploiting people of color, which is the confession through political science and actual mathematical science that no matter what perspective you pick and you want an all-white ethno society, you still depend on the labor of people of color, you still depend on the labor of people that you think are different, and you still depend on all these people's resources and land, unless of course you plan on genociding and killing every race except for your own, which again is Darwinism through brutality. This is not a perspective people see as humane, because even historically when we had slaves, Mexico was handed back to the Native Americans or the Mexica or people of color, because again, their perspective was not to kill everybody. You still need them there to work the land and exploit people so that you can exploit the government and then take the government's money and resources, as proven as Mexico's economy is owned 80% by the United States trade. You can say America doesn't need other countries, but then you look at the international trade and how they trade with these countries, and they clearly need the labor, they clearly need the factories, they clearly need the economic prosperity that comes from pushing people down and exploiting them. So this society of saying you don't need them here in this society is still proven wrong, because you still need them as an overall society, even if they're outside your borders, because you still are in a world that's filled with people of color different than you. So you are confessing scientifically you need these people, always needing people of color, migrants as you call them, because they've been dehumanized in America. They've been called illegals, they've been called third worlders because they like throwing the hard R and everything. But essentially you are confessing again that you are ignorant if you believe your race is the only race you need, your perspective is the only perspective you need, and your nation is the only nation that matters. Because if you become a nation that depends on only itself inside of its borders, you become one of the poorest countries in the world, because you still need international trade. So again, this perspective through science tells you that you need all people, because if what is a human is the question, not what is a person of color, what is a white person, what is a gay person, what is a woman, what is a human being? Because scientifically we already confess that human beings are needed to work with one another in order to prosper and flourish, and therefore the perspective of what you would see as communists is ecosystem protection, where white people still have their right to exist within their own culture. The same way you can have gay people or people of color partaking in their own culture, you can have white people partaking in their own. However, when you see a white person committing to a brutality of Darwinism, they dictate their culture allows them to kill, conquer, and rape and pillage and destroy everyone else's perspective, especially since in America there's over 300,000 child marriages, and they're concerned about transsexuals hurting children, when in America we protect, again, everyone's cultural right, which I think it's disgusting. It's a cultural perspective to, again, child marriage. But again, it's protected by this ecosystem of protection of people's perspectives, which is why a lot of people don't talk about it in America, because that's still a huge voter base of white people who believe that's their culture and their perspective, which again proves that you are not even conquering your own people in accordance to your own values and principles. You just want to look outward into other people that look different than you, rather than look inward in order to change your civil society that you perceive as civil. As soon as you acknowledge all the uncivil parts, and that'll make you more of an equal, because you'll start to see every critique you throw outside the border is still in the inside, even if it was all white, which again you're going to have to push out through Darwinism, brutality. But again, you've proven again, if these people are more powerful than you, then they deserve to rule. Pick humanity, and no one should be sleeping with children or marrying them, because it's inhumane. It's not something that is a culture clash, it is humanity that we are discussing, which is why it's a huge issue in America right now, because there's still people who support this, since the leadership is technically still a convicted rapist, and therefore they change and switch what it means to be a convicted rapist because they don't want to come to the fact in terms that they're okay with rape so long as it's a white person. And if you had a person of color up there that was a convicted rapist, they would never lose to a woman. That woman would have won purely on the fact that they are seen as clean, cordial, and civil in accordance to humanity. Which is why the biggest confession that white men have ever had is they would rather have a rapist in office rather than a woman who's never raped. This is why the perspective is that they always judge you for being different or lesser. It's an oppressor's perspective, which is why they always look down on people outside their race and not internally to judge themselves. It's an unaccountable culture, an unaccountable understanding of reality. And I say culture out of respect for myself because if I don't, they will start to again push this racist perspective that your kind are different than ours. And of course, if we all unite on humanity, they would have to capitulate their viewpoint to what is the most humane, and therefore they would have to ask themselves, what is a human? No longer their bigoted questions of culture attacks, but now what is a human? This is the most important question I have ever asked someone. Because you will be forced to acknowledge your inhumanity, and that is accountability in your face that you will have to face one day. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll have a lot more reviews of this perspective and concept of what it means to be a human as time goes on, because I believe that is one of the most important questions in a society that forgot what it meant to treat each other as equal, because equal, oftentimes they think culture rather than humanity, which is what is cruel and what is not cruel in accordance to a human being's right to be alive with human rights. Thank you for watching.